Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Amnesty International says that it's recorded dozens of accounts of the brutal rape of women by Ethiopian soldiers and their allies. There are warnings that troops are using rape as a weapon against rebels in the country's 9-month war in Tigray. Also, the death toll from the wildfires raging through mountains in Algeria's Kabyle region rises to 65. 3 days of mourning have been declared, but communities say that they don't feel authorities have gone far enough to help. And campaigning winds down in Zambia ahead of Thursday's general election. It's likely to be a close race as President Edgar Lungu faces off against the opposition's Hakainde Hichilema for the third time. But first, Tigray and TPLF rebels in Ethiopia's north claim to have started talks about a possible anti-government alliance with insurgents from Oromia. Now, it's the country's most populous region. A collaboration between militia would put further pressure on the army in the country's 9-month conflict in the north. Now, fighting has cost thousands of lives and triggered a humanitarian crisis that affects millions. On Wednesday, rights group Amnesty International warned that Ethiopian soldiers and allied forces have been using rape as a weapon of war. Investigators believe dozens of women were abused in order to humiliate the Tigrayans. Those documenting testimonies have said that the accounts of the atrocities were some of the worst that they'd come across in their careers.
We've been able to collect the information about the sexual violence committed within the Tigray region of Ethiopia by all the forces that have been operating, the Ethiopian government forces and the allied militias, as well as the Eritrean forces that have been operating in support of the Ethiopian army in the region. And we've collected this information by traveling to the refugee camps in Sudan, where I was able to interview a number of survivors, but also doctors, midwives and nurses who are today refugees in Sudan from Tigray, but who at the beginning of the conflict were working in Tigray and were assisting some of the victims of rape. As well, we interviewed dozens and dozens of women and girls, as well as humanitarian and medical workers in Tigray by phone, because the Ethiopian government has not allowed Amnesty International or any other international human rights organization or any other investigators into Tigray since the beginning of the conflict. The kind of sexual violence that has been perpetrated is shocking, both in terms of the scale, but also the gravity, the type of torture that has been inflicted on women and girls, as well as gang rapes, which has been perpetrated in many of the cases, sexual slavery, that is, several women and girls that we interviewed had been held for days and weeks, during which they were raped by multiple perpetrators and subjected to other forms of torture, including beatings, mutilations, as well as ethnic slurs and death threats on them and on their families. We're not talking about isolated cases or about some rotten apples in within the forces, but rather that all the forces that were operating on behalf of the Ethiopian government in the Tigray region clearly felt right from the beginning and throughout the conflict that they could carry out such atrocities with absolute impunity.
Well, Sudan has agreed to hand jailed former leader Omar al-Bashir over to the International Criminal Court to face charges of genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity. The 77-year-old has been wanted by the court in The Hague for more than a decade over the killing of 300,000 people in the region of Darfur, where conflict erupted in 2003. Now, it's not clear whether Bashir will be extradited or remain in Sudan to face trial. He ruled the country for 3 decades before being ousted in 2019, is currently in jail in Khartoum. Well, Algeria will begin 3 days of mourning on Thursday to honour the 65 lives lost in fires ravaging mountain forests and villages in the region of Kabylie. At least 28 of the victims were soldiers. The blazes began on Monday and have since devastated communities.
Devastation as far as the eye can see. For days, these fires have torn across parts of northern Algeria, causing death and destruction, especially in the inland Kabylia region. Dozens of people have died and hundreds were forced to flee their homes. And after the initial shock, survivors and the displaced have now become overwhelmed with anger against authorities, who they say have been completely absent.
الدولة ما حركتش حتى ساكن، الدولة ما درت والو، كاين غير لي بومبي جا كاميو واحد والشعب كوم الشعب تسمى ما طفاش النار، الديار يتحرقوا، فهمتي؟
Government officials say they suspect widespread arson, with the ongoing heat wave making the situation even worse. Everyday Algerians have taken to social media to donate aid to the hard-hit regions. Meanwhile, NGOs have begun deploying to the area.
The Algerian Red Crescent volunteers intervened by bringing sanitary assistance and first aid gestures to the benefit of the fire victims. There's also distribution of food and water. All rescued families have been taken in charge.
On Wednesday, France said it would be sending 2 firefighting planes to Algeria to help authorities there tackle the fires.
Well, campaigning ended in Zambia on Wednesday, on the eve of the country's general election. Altogether, 16 candidates will be vying to unseat incumbent Edgar Lungu. At his final rally, he highlighted massive investment in infrastructure, but after 6 years in power, the cost of those developments and the country's economic troubles may have undermined his platform.
Edgar Chagwa Lungu was still a political novice when he joined Michael Sata's government to become defense minister in 2013. The following year, he was named justice minister and head of the Patriotic Front, Zambia's ruling party. In 2014, Lungu became acting president after Sata fell prey to a grave illness. And when the head of state passed away, Lungu was elected to replace him and see out the rest of his mandate. Having gotten some experience at the helm of the country, Edgar Lungu ran for his first full presidential term in 2016.
I was on probation for 1 year, 6 months, and I think I've done very well. Those who didn't know me, now they know me. Those who didn't like me, now they like me.
Lungu narrowly won the election despite accusations of fraud by his rival, Hakainde Hichilema, which were ultimately rejected by the courts. Under Lungu's presidency, Zambia launched a series of large-scale infrastructure projects, including the construction of roads, schools, and hospitals. But these massive investments also fueled criticism of the president, who's been accused of financial mismanagement and of borrowing excessively from the Chinese. As the country struggled to pay back its debts, the COVID-19 pandemic dealt another blow to the economy, sparking ballooning inflation and sending the national currency plummeting to record lows. Despite Zambia's financial woes, Lungu still believed he was the man to lead the country out of the crisis, as he decided to run for another term in office.
Well, as mentioned there, Lungu's main rival is a veteran of the electoral race. Hakainde Hichilema has run for office 6 times. The billionaire accuses the president of having failed the many in the country facing economic hardship.
Hakainde Hichilema's supporters rally behind the slogan, "We want change." It's a call that also drove their campaign in the last presidential election. The opposition leaders running for the top job for the 6th time this year. Hichilema has already lost to incumbent Edgar Lungu twice. The rivalry has been costly for Hichilema, who has been detained 15 times. A few years ago already, he claimed to France 24 that he faced political intimidation.
we believe the president will get more desperate than he is now. I'm sure you're aware he's been threatening me directly. I don't know if you have heard about that. And that's unacceptable for him to do that.
Hichilema spent 4 months in jail in 2017, but this time behind bars made him all the more tenacious. Hichilema was brought up in a rural, modest environment, but went on to study economics before becoming one of the most influential businessmen in Zambia. The entrepreneur owns multiple ranches and has invested in several hospitality ventures. Hichilema is one of the richest men in southern Africa. From his mansion in Lusaka, the presidential candidate insists that he is not motivated by greed and isn't afraid of losing.
Accepting defeat is not an issue of accepting or not accepting. It's an issue of having free, fair, credible elections. Those are the issues we've been talking about for years.
In 2016, Hichilema accused the Electoral Commission of fraud. This time around, he says international observers should take a tougher line.
The international community must not see these as just by-the-way things. There's an election in Zambia, they pop around, then they go away, then they write, no. There was a reasonably free and fair election to keep stability. Let's move on. You actually create trouble.
Hichilema has been running the opposition UPND for 15 years. This time around, an alliance of 10 parties is also backing his bid for change.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us, and do so again if you can. Take care.